Well, joining me live now from the state of Victoria is Liberal MP for Kew, Tim Smith. Welcome to the show, Tim. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you, Cory, and good evening to all of your viewers right around Australia.
Tim, you were elected at the same time as the Andrews government back in 2014, and since then, the government has been engulfed in a series of scandals. We remember the red shirt scandal, the taxpayer staff where they were diverted to campaign for the government. Adam Somyurek was sacked for the first time for bullying back in 2015. We had other ministers resign for using ministerial cars as dog transport, travel allowance rorts by the Deputy Speaker, dodgy invoicing. I mean, I could go on and on and on. You know, the CFA Firefighters Union deal, 3 more ministers quit. What is going on when the Andrews government rises in popularity on the back of all those scandals? Why has the opposition been missing in action?
Well, Cory, look, we can always do better. And the honest answer is we in Victoria, in the Liberal Party, have been out of office for the best part of 2 decades. And that in itself is one of the problems and indeed one of the causes of this crisis. The public service in Victoria is so fundamentally politicised and so fundamentally out of its depth. That is why we have had the hotel quarantine disaster. And indeed, that's why our contact tracing in the Department of Health and Human Services has been so third world, so poor, so behind New South Wales, because as you know, when you have successive state Labor governments, they politicise the public service. We have been, for almost 2 decades, a Labor state, and that has resulted in extremely poor public administration. We get to a crisis of this magnitude, and we see the worst public administration failure in the nation's history because the institutions of the state have fallen down, largely because they've been so politicised, contrary to all Westminster traditions.
Well, Tim, in my editorial, I made a pointed reference to 3 institutions. One is the electorate that have widely seemed to ignore the disaster that has been unfolding for the last 2 decades. We also see them elect an upper house which is so unrepresentative. I mean, they rig the system, they game the system, they swap preferences, and you get anti-human people like the Animal Justice Party in there. You get the leftist, extreme hard left Hinchonites up there. You've got the faux libertarian group called Reason. These are the people that are empowering the government. Should there be reform of the upper house?
Well, it's a fair point you make. And look, honestly, and I've said this a few times, the crossbench in the Victorian upper house resembles the bar scene in Star Wars. I mean, some of these oddballs and fringe dwellers are frankly weird. And they get, you know, stuff all percentage of the vote. And there you've got 3 of them deciding the future of the state, whether that be the Animal Justice Party, whether it be the so-called Reason Party or the Green. Now, these 3 individuals have done a shocking and dirty and immoral deal with the Andrews Labor government. I don't know what they've been given out of this, but they rolled over and gave the government a 6-month extension to the state of emergency. Well, shame on them. And I agree with you. When you've got these sort of characters getting elected, who frankly have got less votes than some councillors, it does make you wonder what sort of a democracy are we living in.
Well, Tim, look, I agree with you, and I really appreciate how candid you're being with us and the viewers. But honestly, in the end, this is the primary concern for the opposition, isn't it? You've got to step up, or you as a team need to step up and attack the Andrews government where they're most vulnerable, because Victoria deserves better than what they've currently got and what they've had from the opposition to hold the government for account previously. Do you agree with that?
Look, I'll speak for myself here. We can always do better. And the facts speak for themselves. In my lifetime in the state of Victoria, we've only been in government for 11 years. I've been on this planet for 36 of them. And Cory, you know, I'm a team player. You and I are both former rowers, mate. I was usually in the bow. And, you know, you need to... The teams, the crews that go the fastest are the crews that work the best together. And I want to work with our team to get us back over the line in 2022 because the future of our state depends on it. It absolutely depends on it. I mean, we can't let these characters, these faux communists, these socialists, these frankly people who have trashed the state for their own political interests and for their own egos can't be rewarded with another 4 years.
Tim, can I just change the political slant here for a moment? I've been watching some of the imagery that's been displayed on the mainstream media about the police in Victoria. They're in very intimidating clothing, they're in large groups. I've seen them pluck mobile phones from those who sit too long. I've seen them stalking those who walk too long. I've heard reports about drones tracking people. Now, I'm normally loath to criticise the police, but in this case, in Victoria, they've ignored Extinction Rebellion effectively. They've ignored Black Lives Matter protests. When I was there, there's Stop Adani graffiti everywhere. Whatever socially PC seems to be ignored. Are the police just doing their job? Are they just following orders, or are they actually overreaching themselves like the government?
Well, look, I have a huge degree of sympathy for the police who are on the ground, because they are essentially following the orders of the High Command, who I must say has had an unnaturally close relationship with their political masters in the Labor Party for quite some time in this state. Quite some time. So I'm not one to criticise the police on the ground, despite the fact some of the images I've seen in recent times have been most concerning and quite confronting, and I think a terrible look for the police, particularly the two elderly women that were essentially harassed for simply sitting on a park bench, or the photos that I shared on my own Facebook page the other night that's reached over 100,000 people, with an elderly couple having a coffee near the tan and being asked for their names and addresses and then moved on. And then today we're seeing the riot squad essentially dispatched. Well, where was the riot squad in June when 10,000 Black Lives Matter protesters marched through the streets of Melbourne with impunity, with essentially the support of the Andrews Labor government and the High Command of the police? Well, where was that response in June? So what gets me is the double standard. No one should be protesting during this pandemic. No one. For one, it's against the law. And for two, it's dangerous. So I'm not defending these people who are protesting, but I simply ask the police, and indeed the Andrews Labor government, where is the consistency? Where is the consistent application of law? Where is the rule of law in the state of Victoria tonight, I ask? Because I think it's been undermined by government policy that has been sending all the wrong messages. If you're prepared to protest for a trendy cause that the government essentially agrees with, then go for it. But if you're protesting against the Andrews Labor government, well, you're going to have the riot squad sent towards you. And again, I make the point again. I don't support these protesters. No one should be protesting, but the law should be applied equally to everyone. And I can't for the life of me understand why only 3 Black Lives Matter protesters were fined back in June, when it was unlawful for more than 20 people to gather under the Chief Health Officer's directions.
Well, Tim, that's an excellent point. And if I recall correctly, wasn't there a justification that the High Court upheld the right of people to protest, even though it was against the laws that were passed by the Parliament? Now, if that's true, and I'm not going to defend the people out there at the moment protesting, but I can perfectly understand it, and the double standards which you highlighted then. One group of protesters, if you're PC and you're doing what's called a virtuous cause, it's okay. But if you want to complain about your civil liberties and your freedoms being infringed by a newly minted police state, you find yourself rounded up, your name taken and shipped off to the Victorian gulags.
100% correct. And what worries me is that our society is fraying at the seams because the application of the law seems unfair. And these rules, these directions seem frankly nonsensical and disproportionate to the pandemic response. The curfew is the best example of this. I mean, an 8 p.m. curfew until going to 9 p.m. tomorrow, but a 9 p.m. curfew until the end of October. I mean, I saw someone write in The Australian earlier this week that this reminds them of martial law in Poland in 1981. And it does, because it won't stop the virus.
Tim, the virus only works up until 8 o'clock, or now until 9 o'clock. Tim Smith, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Cory. All the best.
Now, thank you. Now